And we are recording on Monday, November 10th, 2025 at 11:12 a.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Tom Rempfer, who's you've been on here once before, talking about, I believe, the anthrax vaccine. I remember the thumbnail I made of you. I think I put you in front, or it's not, it was a picture of you in front of it. I believe an A10 Warthog with the giant 30 mil behind it. But to answer your question, you just did I go to med school? No, I had a gut feeling that it wasn't for me, and I think I had crossed the wires in my mind about I was very proud of it, and my family was proud, and it was a cool reputational thing. It was my ego. I loved the challenge, the vanishingly small percent chance of getting in. And I think I had associated that almost like Pavlovianly with this is what I want to do. And I knew I wanted to help people. That was always very genuine. But I didn't think that this was for me. And I think I had crossed those wires at Proud, and I work out every day. I have for 25 years. I'm proud of like my physique. No part of me wants to do that for a living. And I think that's what I had kind of crossed the wires with was cool, proud, love the challenge. Don't know if I love it. And I don't think that is a field to go into if you don't love it. Not only because you'll burn out, but because your patients aren't going to get the best doctor that they deserve. So, yeah, to answer your question, but Mr. Renford, please introduce yourself for people who maybe didn't hear the last episode we did.
Oh, I appreciate it, Tommy. I am a retired Air Force colonel and pilot. I'm super grateful for all the experiences that the military gave me flying A-10s, F-16s, and F-117s, and ending my career flying drones. We touched upon a little bit of that almost 2.5 years ago when we did our first podcast. So I sure appreciate you letting me come on and do an update on some of the issues.
How does so I remember, and you'll have to excuse me. I've done this is episode 1883. I've certainly hit the limit of recalling every guest from every episode. I knew you flew A-10s. I didn't know you flew F-17. How does that compare to just? I love all things Cold War history. I love Skunk Works, F-117. And then I guess Northrop B-2, B-21, the SR-71, U-2. It's all just the coolest stuff. How does that compare to just life? And so, like, I'm getting my fix, my crazy workaholic fix. I'm getting that through the podcast, the same pre-med fix. How do you? That's got to be a high bar to reestablish piloting an F-117. I mean, is that something you chase? Is that a dragon you still chase?
I was grateful for the experience. Anytime you're flying fighter aircraft in particular, there's an inherent danger to it. So once you get done with it successfully, and once you complete doing the mission successfully without incident, I'm able to compartmentalize it, move beyond it, and, hopefully move on to the next experience, whether it be family or medical freedom. So yeah, I'm very grateful for the experiences and grateful for the American taxpayer, our citizenry who made all that possible.
I know I know I believe it's called the Hopeless Diamond. I still think it's the most beautiful plane. I really do. I think SR-71 too, but there's something about F-117 that is just so alien that it's the absolute pushing the envelope, and I just love it. But because that's not the topic of the show, although I could talk to you about that forever. When we last spoke, it was about medical freedom. We were much more in the thick of it, and it has uh, loosely kind of slowed down. I'm allowed back on YouTube, but I'm not holding my breath. Where does that bring us to today?
So yeah, it's interesting that we're talking today. I've just spent the weekend at the Children's Health Defense Moment of Truth conference, all about medical freedom. And I sent you a picture of one of my dear friends, Dr. Merrill Nass. We just had breakfast together, and we were able to rekindle, hug each other. And I was very impressed with the conference, all of their wonderful speakers, and it actually made me contemplate whether or not the folks on the other side of these issues have conferences and are getting together and are hugging each other. And I actually seriously doubt it, because what we're celebrating is the movement in the movement. We're celebrating the idea that there is more medical freedom today, particularly with Secretary Kennedy getting in to be the secretary head of Department of Health and Human Services. There's been a lot of positive change with the new administration. And so I found myself wondering, I wonder if those people that were on the other sides of these issues, government, military, business officials, I wonder if they're getting together and celebrating the fact that they violated the law, that they violated service members and citizens' health rights, that they wasted literally billions of dollars of taxpayers' funds. And I don't think those kind of conferences are happening. I don't think those people are getting together and hugging each other and giving each other congratulations for what they did. So, for what that's worth, I was grateful to participate in this conference, meet wonderful people, see Dr. Merrill Nass again, and Dr. Merrill Nass goes back to the beginnings of our anthrax vaccine dilemma, the anthrax vaccine mandate, 28 plus years ago, and she was one of the few doctors that we were able to reach out to for support information. Once we realized that the Department of Defense boilerplate script and that the government or military mandate was illegal, we were able to reach out to her. So we were very grateful for that. And as a little bit of a rewind to what we talked about almost 2.5 years ago, I gave a little bit of the background, extensive background in that previous podcast with respect to the illegalities behind the anthrax vaccine mandate. And so I'll rehash it just a little bit. I'll kind of summarize for your listening audience this time. But the bottom line was myself, a dear colleague, the late Lieutenant Colonel Russ Dingle. He was the lead of a commander's team to bring to the attention of the chain of command potential problems with the anthrax vaccine mandate. And what we rapidly discovered was that what the Department of Defense was telling us just fundamentally was not true. And it was defied by their own documents, by Senate reports, Government Accountability Office reports, their own paperwork. Their own documents showed that they knew perfectly well that the vaccine was potentially unsafe, basically ineffective, and absolutely not properly approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And all of those things were required in order to mandate the shot on the troops. And it took a bunch of years, but we were able to bring to the attention of the government, in particular the federal courts, the fact that as early as 1985, the Department of Defense was trying to pursue a new vaccine. As early as 1985, the government was publishing in the Federal Register proposed rules to get the vaccine properly licensed that were never finalized. So therefore, it was an unapproved medical product. It wasn't properly licensed by the Food and Drug Administration. Their own documents included an investigational new drug application that showed that they were trying to get it properly approved, but it was all pending. And that was all illegal according to the law, 10 USC 1107. And fortunately, Congress had put out reports. There was a Senate report, Senate Report 10397. That report clearly said that the Department of Defense knew perfectly well that their use of anthrax vaccine during the first Gulf War was investigational. The law that had been passed in the interim said, based on that, you can't mandate this product. And then there was a subsequent House report, House Report 106-556. That report specifically said that the program that the Department of Defense was implementing was not in accordance with the law. So in addition, the Government Accountability Office did a multitude of reports questioning safety, efficacy of the vaccine, and even questioning the unapproved manufacturing changes that the Department of Defense had implemented with respect to the vaccine, changing its fermenters, changing its filters, increasing the number of assembly lines, effectively potentially altering the potency, purity, sterility, and stability of the vaccine. And that's all FDA parlance. Those are their requirements that you can't alter a biologic product with manufacturing changes if you don't get them approved, properly tested, properly approved. And they hadn't done any of that. So fortunately, all of the government records were basically supporting our position that the vaccine mandate was illegal, it was patently illegal. And even more fortunate, ultimately, the federal courts weighed in and affirmed that the program was illegal. They halted the program. They enjoined the program. They filed an injunction against the Department of Defense. And, they specifically said that, the Department of Defense cannot treat our soldiers as guinea pigs. And so, we were grateful for that. They did stop the program for a period of time. Very interesting that in the interim, they ended up passing a new law. Congress gave the Department of Defense, the FDA, a new law called the Emergency Use Authorization, passed it as a part of the PrEP Act. That emergency use authorization allowed or authorized the use of a product that had a reasonable expectation of safety and efficacy, not a proven not proven safety and efficacy, but just a reasonable expectation. They allowed a product such as that, which was an unapproved medical product. Again, those are FDA terms with respect to emergency use authorized products, or EUAs. I'll say EUA from here to be more synced. So after the court injunction, they allowed the anthrax vaccine to be continued to be used as an EUA, but they guaranteed, and they filed this in the Federal Register, that there would be no penalty, no loss of benefits, no job loss. It wasn't even allowed to be a bar for deployment. It could not even stop a soldier from, going over to an area of responsibility and serving their country. They could not give the soldiers any penalty, no penalty. And so that's an interesting intersection, because our previous conversation was in the height of the COVID shot mandates essentially being taken down by the federal courts. The Supreme Court found the large employer mandate was illegal, and pretty much all the other mandates were enjoined by the federal courts for a variety of reasons. When we talked, the Department of Defense had just been ordered by the Congress via the law, the 2003 National Defense Authorization Act, to halt the COVID shot mandate. So unlike the anthrax vaccine, where the mandate was halted by the judicial branch, it was the legislative branch that weighed in and actually stopped the COVID shot mandate. As a result of that, the Biden administration made motions to the federal courts to dismiss all of the court cases, because no longer did the plaintiffs have any standing, because there was no longer a mandate. And so that happened across the board. The federal courts basically mooted and dismissed all of these cases. They didn't want another ruling like happened with anthrax vaccine, where it was the uncontested, the mandate was declared illegal. They didn't want that. So they were successful in getting most of the litigation dropped. And that's unfortunate, but the reality is the Supreme Court ruled that the large employer mandate was indeed illegal. And so there's a pretty good judicial record about the illegality of the various programs. But the reason why the EUA intersection is important, anthrax was the first ever EUA, but COVID was a subsequent EUA for countermeasures and mandates. And as a result, all COVID shots, all mandates with respect to COVID should have been strictly voluntary. People should have been given their prior consent or their informed consent. They should have had the option to accept or refuse those products. It should never have resulted in penalty, job loss, loss of benefits, and entitlements. So the government blatantly, once again, with COVID shots, they broke the law. They were able to get the cases dismissed because of lack of standing, mooting the cases as a result of the mandates being rescinded. The federal government actually, titled their executive order to stop the mandates as moving beyond. So the administration administration wanted nothing more than for everybody just to move beyond and turn the page and not realize that the mandates that they had imposed were illegal, but they were. They were patently illegal. They were in violation of the requirement of federal law, both for citizens and soldiers, to be given their informed consent, their prior consent, the option to accept or refuse those products. Um, so that's kind of the summary of where we're at, but I can give you updates on what's happened since from a reconciliation, restitution, remedy standpoint. I think that's a important update for us.
Please do. And then real quick, what does boilerplate script mean? I've never heard that.
Yeah, so the only reason I use that term is early on in the anthrax vaccine fiasco, one of the Assistant Secretary of Defenses for Public Affairs actually got up in front of the press and said, "Get ready for the boilerplate script." And essentially what he's talking about is the narrative, the scribed
Got it.
narrative, what the script is, right?
Got it.
And it's boilerplate. Like we've written this down, we're getting everybody to repeat that. The American people have seen that over the years
Safe
more
and
and more.
effective, weapons of mass destruction. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so the talking points, right? The
Yeah.
boilerplate script is the talking points. So he jokingly said that, but it's so true that they gave the sound bites, the talking points to the people, the doctors, the lawyers, the commanders in the military. Same thing happened with our civilian society with COVID. They gave them the boilerplate script. Everybody repeated it. None of them really knew what they were talking about. None of them really knew what the law was. None of them knew whether or not the COVID shots were safe and effective or FDA approved, but they gave them the talking points. Part of the talking points were that the COVID shots were FDA approved, which was a blatant fabrication. At the time that there were mandates, there were no FDA approved doses anywhere in the Strategic National Stockpile, in any pharmacy, in any drugstore. There were no FDA approved products. Only FDA approved products could potentially be mandated, but EUA products invented and produced under a different regulatory standard, different inspection scheme, different regulatory construct. They could not suddenly say that those emergency use authorized products, which is all they had, all of the labels on every vial said emergency use authorized. And those products required informed consent. They required the option to accept or refuse. Soldiers could not, under the law, subset of the earlier law that I mentioned, it's 1107A, specifically says that soldiers can't be mandated to take those products. But they basically committed a gargantuan fraud on the troops and the citizenry, and they tried to say that these shots were approved, and there were no actually FDA approved shots available. So it was a massive ruse. It was just fundamentally dishonest for the government and the military to do that. Most of the people that were repeating the boilerplate script, regurgitating the sound bites, they had no idea whether or not these products were actually FDA approved. They had no idea that everything that they were ordering people to take, threatening their jobs over, were actually experimental products. And again, in FDA parlance, unapproved medical products. You cannot take an experimental product and mandate a human being to take that product. In the military, you could. There's a little caveat to the law that says if the president waives informed consent, they can mandate it. That did not occur. It did not occur with the COVID shots, and it had not occurred with the anthrax vaccine mandate 25 plus years earlier. So therefore, the mandates were patently illegal. And so one of the updates for you is the fact that earlier this year, once the Trump administration came in addition to President Trump promulgating an executive order to say that all troops that were negatively impacted lost their jobs, they would be reinstated if they wanted to come back in. They would get back pay. And basically, it was a national apology to the troops for what the Department of Defense had done to them with the COVID shots. And then the Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, actually went one step further, and he made sure that soldiers were also going to get career setbacks remedied And he actually declared that the COVID shot mandate in the military was unlawful. Very important. I'm sure there's a lot of folks in the Department of Defense that didn't want him to say that, but what's the harm in telling the truth? That was the truth. It's been declared by the Secretary of War himself, and as a result, our Department of Defense, specifically the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, is trying to be transparent, and they're trying to go out of their way to facilitate record corrections for our troops. It's going very slow because essentially you have a 95 to 90% of the behind the scenes bureaucracy not really excited about this because they're the ones that implemented the illegal mandate. So they've been slow rolling our administration officials, which is shameful. But the good news is they're being persistent. They actually called a bunch of service members in. I was fortunate to be able to be a part of it via Zoom for me with Secretary of War Hegseth, where he committed to doing this right and making sure that we get our soldiers reinstated and get them back pay and get their adverse personnel actions rescinded. And then even most recently, just a few days ago, an undersecretary actually committed to doing an after action report, studying lessons learned, and as he said, to make sure that we never do this again. And that's kind of been my, I think, participant role is trying to emphasize that we did all of this before. We made all of these mistakes before. All of these malfunctions had already occurred. But nobody, after the anthrax vaccine disaster, nobody ever did an after action report. They never did a debrief. There were never any lessons learned. And as a result of not having a formal policy process where you analyze what you did, why there were malfunctions, and how we make sure we never do that again. They never did it, right? So when COVID came up, they never had anything to reflect back on. And they went ahead and they made all the same mistakes. Just like with anthrax, they took an unapproved medical product and they mandated it for the troops. And so the good news is our Department of Defense officials, I'm very encouraged. I'm proud of them. I want them to stay on the task. I want them to finish the job, but I am encouraged. We've come a long way. COVID violations are being handled in a dramatically different way than the anthrax vaccine violations were handled. And so to kind of, again, take a step back in history with anthrax, right about the time that we had been working with the Congress, we had been, starting to work with the courts, and we had been working with the administration. I had been personally talking with Karl Rove. He was personally guaranteeing me that the Department of Defense was going to review the
Real,
program.
real quick, I
Go ahead.
apologize. I don't know if you
No
can hear. I
problem.
don't know if Zoom is canceling out. There's like a ton of fire trucks going by. Can you hear that?
No problem.
All right,
I can't.
you can?
I can't hear him.
Oh, beautiful. Keep going. Karl Rove.
Okay. So Karl Rove, Bush administration, good men, knew that there was a problem, right? H. Ross Perot, great man, had personally connected me and my colleague, Russ Dingle. Again, Russ Dingle, one of my heroes, the intellectual founder of the arguments that brought down the anthrax vaccine mandate back in 2003. And they listened to us and they guaranteed that there was going to be a review. That review happened in the Department of Defense from Paul Wolfowitz to a couple undersecretaries, Dr. David Chu and Pete Aldridge. They gave recommendations to Rumsfeld to cancel the anthrax vaccine program, minimize the use of the vaccine, develop a new vaccine, which they knew that they needed to do as early as 1985, and develop a doctrinally coherent manner to deal with these threats in the future versus these mandates. And unfortunately, what happened right after that, 9/11 happened about 3 weeks later.
Oh.
And a week after 9/11, anthrax letters went in the mail. Imagine that.
Mm.
And so our immediate suspicions were that this was potentially an inside job in order to scare the American people on the heels of 9/11. And it worked.
100%.
And,
100%.
and and it worked. Okay. And there was even a second round of letters in October. And I was on the phone with Senator Daschle's office at the time. At the moment they opened their anthrax letter, they evacuated the office. They apologized. They hung up on me. I was in disbelief because once again, I seriously believed that it was probably a false flag event, a fear bomb meant to try to resuscitate the anthrax vaccine program that was on the verge of cancellation by Don Rumsfeld, by the Bush administration. But instead, what happened as a result of the anthrax letters is the anthrax vaccine program was resuscitated. It was rejuvenated. And what's important to note is that these aren't my opinions, and particularly the motive for the anthrax letter attacks. Our suspicion was to save the anthrax vaccine program. 10 years later, the FBI and the Department of Justice affirmed that very thing. Word search motive in the Amerithrax report, the motive was to save the failing anthrax vaccine program. But by the time the government made that declaration, nobody went back and said, hey, maybe we should look at why we were going to cancel that program. Maybe we should look at resurvey the punishments that we meted out against our troops. So who was one of the primary, most renowned targets of the anthrax letter attacks? Senator Daschle. Senator Daschle was one of our key allies on Capitol Hill. Senator Daschle was questioning why the troops were being punished over this basically experimental product. And so as a result, Senator Daschle unfortunately was shut down, and nobody ended up doing anything to correct service members' records. So I mention that anecdote simply because today, with respect to COVID, there is great progress being made on record corrections. There's been no false flag events and fear bombs disrupting events that are suppressing the oversight and the process of correcting records. Whereas in anthrax, everything was upset, unsettled, disturbed, stopped due to the anthrax letter attacks. And even though it was ultimately determined to be a Department of Defense insider, an inside job in order to save the failing anthrax vaccine program. And again, that's not Tom Rempfer Buzz telling you that. That is the government's position that they were trying to save the anthrax vaccine program. Similar to anthrax vaccine mandate never having a debrief, never having an after action report. No, after the FBI report came out, nobody wanted to go back and say, wow, we were hoodwinked by those anthrax letter attacks. Maybe we should go back and look at why we were going to cancel the anthrax vaccine, why we were going to develop a new vaccine, and hopefully why they were going to consider correcting soldiers' records. It wasn't until President Trump came in 2016, halfway through his administration. I had worked with White House advisors, and they actually gave direction to the Department of Defense to correct the records for folks that had been punished over anthrax vaccine. Problem was, President Trump was undermined. As we all know, during much of his first administration, there were a lot of other tangential specious allegations that ended up, basically allowing a lot of his objectives to be undermined. Correcting records for our troops over the anthrax vaccine illegal mandate was one of the things that was interrupted. Only 3 service members, to the best of my knowledge, out of thousands, have had their records corrected related to the anthrax vaccine illegal mandate. So one of my objectives is to try to get those anthrax era veterans' records corrected, just as President Trump had ordered, but was undermined in 2018. And so I'm hopeful that that will happen. Some of the arguments against it is we don't know who those troops were. Well, good news is the Congress, by law, 10 U.S.C. 1178, the 2001 National Defense Authorization Act, actually ordered the Department of Defense to track separations and refusals. They're supposed to, by law, have the list. If they didn't compile a list, then compile a list, because it's a matter of law that you were supposed to do it. So that's not a good argument that we don't know who those people were, because you were required by law to have that list. You could simply print out new discharge certificates from bad conduct and dishonorable and other honorable, less than honorable, upgrade those discharges to fully honorable, mail out those discharge certificates. It's literally zero cost. And so, and that would be the other, counter argument is, well, it would be very expensive to go back and give remedy to those troops. It's been, 28 plus years, well beyond statute of limitations for things like back pay and other remedies. So I think at a minimum, what our government and military could do is do the right thing, do the honorable thing, and at least correct the paperwork. Give these veterans honorable discharges, send them their certificate, get that printer running, and it's the least you could do. I'm disappointed that they haven't done it, but I'm encouraged that President Trump tried to get them to do it in 2018. That alone should be a justification to do it now. But the now precedent-setting corrections related to the COVID punishments and discharges basically makes the case by precedent that you should also go back and correct the records for troops punished during the anthrax vaccine debacle.
The fact that there's no after action report, well, it implies that they don't want there to be one, right? It's one of those things where it's like
Right.
if a right could be taken away in a second, if you're, if you're in prison and at any time they can take away your little TV, well, it was never really yours, right? Which you
Right.
expect in prison versus where sure the government could try to confiscate guns right now, but that would be an issue. This is something where it seems like you can't do this. It's against Geneva, it's against the EUA, it's against laws, precedents, military, blah blah blah. But they did it with anthrax, and then they did it with COVID. Well, it kind of implies that you don't really have any safety against this. The idea of safety or the idea of informed consent is a facade that looks good and they hold it up, but when push comes to shove, as we've just seen, it'll all go away and they'll just do whatever they want. So
So
that's not,
if I can interrupt,
yeah, go
Tommy,
for it, dude.
I think that might be reality or the perception of reality, but the reality is they have to comply with the law. We
Sure.
cannot fall into the trap of the ethical relativism and think that, oh well, they do this
This
all
is
the time. There's
different
nothing
and
we can do
save
about it.
grandma. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
you can't now.
the whole point of that book behind me unyielding is if your rights are being violated, you have to stand up for yourself or stand up for the other person whose rights are being violated. That is the only way to stop in reality that people's rights are being violated by the federal government and the Department of Defense. And the good news is that by and large the people that have stood up to try to stop the mandates, get corrections, it's happening. It's happening only due to their aggressive, passionate, honorable advocacy. I'm so proud of the COVID era veterans for standing up for themselves. At this conference, I met quite a group of them. I'm inspired. I'm proud to know that we're leaving the defense of this nation in the hands of such honorable people. Some of them were able to stay in because the injunctions saved their jobs. Some of them are getting reinstated. And these are the kind of people that we want working for our military and making sure that our military and our government, writ large, is actually complying with the law, because we can never fall into that trap where we think we're powerless, because clearly these young people, these incredibly intelligent, impassioned folks, they stood up for their rights. The president ended up saying, "You're right, I'm going to fix it." The Secretary of War ended up saying, "You're right, it was actually unlawful," and they are fixing it. So it's a wonderful story with a happy ending. It's not finished yet, but they've done a great job. I'm proud of them. I do hope that in time our government will have the humility to take a step back and do those zero cost record corrections for our anthrax veterans as well, since the government similarly violated the law during that time frame.
No, and I don't know if you could speak on this because it's maybe outside your expertise. It's certainly outside mine. Um, where, where does so you have back pay, you can correct the record, blah blah blah, you can expunge things. What about people who've been physically injured? I mean, I've interviewed people younger than me. I'm 35. I've interviewed younger people younger than me who are in wheelchairs now. Not like my thumb hurt. I mean, like heart attacks at 25. Like what does that ever get? And okay, then let's just say instead of everyone within the military, because I would say statistically that would have happened. Is there what kind of correction is there for that? I mean, is it medical bills paid? Is there a lawsuit? Like, where do what? It's fine. I didn't take the vaccine because I didn't want it, and I was like, you have to shoot me. But there's a lot of people that didn't have that choice, and although it'd be great to expunge the record and blah blah blah, there are also people who, regardless of even medical bills, let's just say that those were paid back. What do you do to people who are in their 30s who had strokes and now have to use a cane? Like, where does that, is that asking for too much?
Absolutely not. I mean, the government imposed a mandate illegally on people with an unapproved medical product, and the government should be liable for that. Unfortunately, the manufacturers are not liable for them because they gave them a liability waiver when they produced the products and bought the products from those companies. So that is a shame. That probably should be stripped. They should have their liability stripped. But the reality is the government should be liable. I will speak to soldiers in particular. I actually sat next to one of them at a dinner, a soldier that had been paralyzed, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and had been paralyzed from the shot, and is receiving care. But there are literally thousands of troops that have suffered a variety of medical illnesses, whether they be cardiac or pulmonary or immunological problems with respect to the shots. The shots aggravate your immune system by design, and sometimes that ends up going haywire, and folks are having all kinds of problems from myocarditis, pericarditis, embolisms, strokes. There's all kinds of immunological problems, neurological problems, and for our troops in particular, there is a provision under the law called the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins. The Department of Defense, in concert with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Health and Human Services, should add the COVID shots to the PACT Act, the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins. It was an unapproved medical product. It was experimental, and troops got sick from it. Citizens did as well. There's a mechanism under the law called the CICP, the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program. That law should be reviewed. They should make sure that they're actually adjudicating the cases, and they should take away the 1 year statute of limitations, and they should treat our citizens similarly, with positive compensation as a result of their injuries from these experimental drug products. So with the military, they could do it with the PACT Act. With civilians, they could refresh the CICP law, and in the future, they should strip the liability from the manufacturers to make sure that they are held liable if products actually end up injuring our citizens or soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, I look at just last December, so about a year ago, there's two people from my graduating class in both doctors, both incredibly, well educated, healthy, got a good head on their shoulders. One died of a heart attack, and one died of an aneurysm. But I mean, aneurysms do happen. Okay. But I look at that and I'm like, what about their parents? They're both only children. They're single kids. Sorry. I look at that. I'm like, what? How, it's and not. This is obviously I'm not putting this on you, but just as like a thought, it's like, how do you even like where's the these are people who they were medical professionals and they're like, well, I have to take this if I want to keep working at my job and helping people. Like these are angels on earth,
Right?
drop dead. Like I don't even know how to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, and what's even harder to wrap your head around is the fact that the Congress and even the executive branch to date don't appear to be even addressing the injuries caused by these products, the known injuries, and the fact that citizens and soldiers essentially have been abandoned with respect to these injuries. So, my passion project is to get troops records corrected, but you raise a very good point. There is this whole additional landscape of medical injuries that must be addressed by our government because for the good faith and trust of the American people, they owe it to our citizenry and our soldiers to take care of our citizens and troops if the government has actually made them ill. And there's no question with both the anthrax vaccine and the COVID shots that people did fall ill, and they should address it. A responsible government should take care of these folks.
Um, and then in terms of military preparedness, that's also a major like national security threat if you are either killing your servicemen and women and or booting them out because they didn't get the vaccine. How does that get addressed?
Massive loss of taxpayer resources. With anthrax, there were thousands of people that were either coerced or thrown out of the military. All of those training costs are totally wasted. With COVID, I would say it was probably tenfold greater, up to 100,000 troops left early or were kicked out over the mandate. Department of Defense generally likes to fudge these numbers, but the new administration has acknowledged that there was a readiness recruitment retention problem, a lot of attrition over the vaccines. Fortunately, they kind of refer to it as the Trump bump. Fortunately, the recruitment is at an all-time high. That's good, and that's because our citizens, our young people, their parents actually trust the new administration and the new administration and leadership in the Department of War. So that's good, but 100,000 troops, you start calculating what it cost to train those troops, and that all of those troops were lost, that readiness was lost, that retention was lost, that combat capability was lost. We're talking some significant dollars, billions and billions, tens, potentially hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money that has been wasted. And it's all been wasted based on lies. It's all been wasted based on manipulation of administrative processes and of of fabricating the legitimacy of these products to the American people. With anthrax, they told them it was safe, effective, and FDA approved. That turned out not to be true. Federal courts have affirmed it. With COVID shots, they said they were safe, effective, and FDA approved, and that is a total fabrication. They were considered to be, expected to be reasonably safe and effective, and I don't think that's borne out. And they were told that they would be taking FDA approved product. The president himself, President Biden, stood up and said they're FDA approved. And he probably didn't know that every vial, every dose was emergency use authorized, was an unapproved medical product. And so, speaking of fabrications, abuse of power and lies, really interesting parallel between the two programs. They were both patently illegal and full of falsities, of completely false narrative, false script. But in order to get these mandates approved, with both programs, they basically fabricated paperwork in order to make it look like they were properly approved. With the anthrax vaccine, we had something called the Friedman Memo. And the Friedman Memo was something where they reached out to the Department of Health and Human Services, and they took a guy that was a brand new appointee, and they got him to say that he believed that it was approved for what they were using it for. The problem is the entire historical record showed that the Department of Defense knew perfectly well that it was experimental, investigational, not approved for what they were using it for. And they even had a pending application in that was unapproved because they were trying to get it approved. So it was a total fabrication. It was an administrative process that was completely corrupt, the Friedman Memo with respect to anthrax vaccine. And the parallel is during COVID, they did the same thing. They reached out to the other agency and they tried to get a memo that said that the vaccine doses could be used interchangeably. And it was a total fabrication, and they actually took it out of context. It's true that from a medical perspective, the drugs potentially could be used by a doctor while giving informed consent. medically interchangeably. But with respect to the regulatory or legal requirements as to whether or not you can mandate them, they were not interchangeable. And federal courts have actually expounded upon this and agreed with that concept that they were not interchangeable. But that is exactly the same modus operandi that the Department of Defense executed, manipulating a government agency to try to give them paperwork that made it look like their known illegal mandate was legal. And we have that pattern, and that kind of bad behavior should stop in the Department of War. And hopefully, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, his undersecretaries are aware of this kind of bad behavior and do not do the same thing. Never reach out to other agencies for political cover and try to get memos, convenient fig leaf memos, in order to try to make it look like what they're doing is proper when they know perfectly well that what they're doing is patently illegal.
You have to excuse me. This is one of the most shows I go into. I can just banter back and forth about whatever and just, pull stuff out of my butt. But this is something where it's specifically around COVID is episodes where I do a lot less talking because I'm normally talking to an expert. So, um, I preface that for, a rather low value follow-up question. And what other updates do you have? Because this is, again, I have no experience in any of this. Or this is an episode where it's more like it's yours and just run with it. Like I don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's been, 8, 9 months since the new administration came in. Right at the very beginning, January, they said, correct the records, reinstate these guys. To date, there's been 4, maybe 6, hopefully by next week, 12 people reinstated. The numbers are very small. I don't want to see President Trump and Secretary of War Hegseth be undermined like happened during my generation and has happened to date in the Department of Defense. And that's why they're on it and recommitting over and over again that they're going to fix it. So it's very encouraging that some of these COVID era veterans that were booted are actually being brought back in and being made a part of the process in order to facilitate reinstatement and remedy for their fellow service members. So that's really encouraging. And I'm going to give you one example because it's publicly known. There's a young man by the name of First Lieutenant Mark Bashow, and Mark is a highly intelligent professional, former public health officer for the United States Army. And his case is so significant because it's literally not since the pre-World War II timeframe when they court-martialed Brigadier General William Billy Mitchell and punished him and threw him out of the military. They basically did a political prosecution of him because he was trying to get air power to become a part of the Department of Defense, and that threatened all the rice bowls, right? So they punished him, they kicked him out, and it wasn't until he was posthumously promoted to brigadier general that he really was vindicated. Well, fortunately, with Lieutenant Bashow, he's been retroactively promoted to captain. He's been reinstated. He's getting his back pay, and he's going to be a part of the process to help his fellow soldiers, airmen, marine, and so that's very, very encouraging. That's another update. And not only did Mark Bashow get this positive treatment from the corrections board in making sure that his case is getting corrected, but he also received a presidential pardon. He's the only service member who received a presidential pardon. Absolutely unprecedented for his refusals over the illegal EUA COVID mandates. But the reason why it's so significant and the reason why the presidential pardon was necessary is similarly, on an unprecedented basis, he was the only service member court-martialed over the COVID mandates. So one of the Vindman brothers, you're probably familiar with
Hmm.
the Vindman family. One of the Vindman brothers was actually the uh, soldier that was pounding his chest and congratulating himself for getting this service member punished, court-martialed, and ultimately kicked out of the military. So absolutely despicable because the entire underlying scheme was illegal. But he's actually was pounding his chest and congratulating himself for getting this service member kicked out. Well, that's all been reversed, so that's a good thing. It's all unprecedented. Hasn't happened since Brigadier General William Billy Mitchell, and so I'm very proud of this young man who's getting reinstated. That's one of the significant and I say historical updates.
What did you say Mitchell was trying to do? Make air power a bigger part of the military?
Yeah, he was aggressively challenging
It,
the military leadership to adopt air power, to
what
respect it,
what year
whereas
what years was this around?
pre-World War II,
Yeah,
30s.
that is, sorry to interrupt. If you look back at that, that right there is your case in point to follow your gut and do what you know is right. Because I mean, you have this great book called Empires of the Sky, all about the Zeppelins in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then how the biplane kind of kicked that out the door, and then as air power becomes a larger and larger thing in World War II, it wins the war, and then it becomes such a big thing that the U.S. Army Air Forces, as you know, becomes the Air Force in 1947.
Right.
That right there is, there's a million little examples of like doing the right thing. That right there is the most glaring thing, that not only did he try to do the right thing, but that the system will, like white blood cells, they will protect themselves. And if you were to say that now, like, yeah, we're trying to get rid of if you tried to get rid of air power right now, you'd be arrested on suspicion of espionage and you'd be executed at Gitmo. Like,
Right.
and so I
Mhm.
think that is I've never heard that. That's an extremely important example of
Right.
they will do anything to protect themselves.
Yeah.
That
And
is
and Mitchell
wild.
Mitchell today, Mitchell is like the founding, inspirational father of the
Yeah.
United States Air Force. He's
Yeah.
honored. Unfortunately, it all happened posthumously. He has a dining hall named after him at the Air Force Academy. I look forward to the day that Bashow has a dining hall or a base, a building named after him, because he's
Yeah.
similarly a hero. He was unflinching, and he was able to ultimately be vindicated and be reinstated, and just very proud of him. He's just one anecdote amongst a field of thousands and thousands of these COVID era veterans who stood up for themselves and made the government and the military listen. And there really wasn't a counter argument. It was so blatantly unlawful what they had done that they looked at it. They were willing to listen. See, this is a very key component to the entire dialectic. We talked about dialectic 2.5 years ago. The entire conversation requires people to listen. There has to be a conversation. Fortunately, the new administration allowed the conversation and quickly came to the determination that they had broken the law. But there's also another thing we talked about 2.5 years ago was kind of tribalism, right? So there's also a problem where these different tribes end up creating future altered narratives. For instance, the Department of the Army doesn't really hold up William Billy Mitchell as a hero because it was kind of embarrassing to the Department of the Army. I may be wrong on that, but I don't think there's a lot of buildings named after him. And he's certainly not the inspirational founder of the major capabilities that their service has to this day. So that's kind of a concept there, or an example of this tribalism, that even though the Air Force has honored this veteran and hero, another component of the military kind of downplays it because it's a
Hmm.
little bit embarrassing to them. And so similarly, as we move forward, it's important that people, get out of the tribe, mindset, and that they actually consider listening to the critiques, the lessons learned, read the after action reports. There has to be an after action report, and actually consider where their malfunctions may have occurred and make sure they don't happen again. That's what we didn't do with Anthrax, and then unfortunately the same playbook came out, and they did the same thing with COVID. So it's very important that all the services, that frankly the Department of War, as the overarching structure, demands that all service members, all commanders, all lawyers, all public affairs people get this training, understand the mistakes that were made, and make sure that we never do it again. Some people have advocated for Constitution training, and I'm going to tell you, as a 32-year veteran, I never had any Constitution training. I'm well aware of the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution, our rights. I can enumerate them, but by and large, many of our service members don't get constitutional training. If they were to get constitutional training, they would be more aware of their own rights. And maybe that's something that the senior military leadership is scared of. They shouldn't be, because our entire oath is to the Constitution. Our young service members to our old service members should all be understanding the components of that Constitution and why these 100,000 troops departed during the COVID mandates, because they were basically dedicated to their Constitution. They were dedicated to their oath of office, and they were right. And so it's a lesson that needs to be learned, and we need to make a constitutional course part of our military's curriculum.
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm not surprised at all that the army downplays it. And what you said about, posthumously. Unfortunately, that tends to be the very rarely in history do you actually get to live to see right. You're right. The only one I can really think of is Joseph Lister and the antiseptic technique, the idea of like you need to clean surgical tools. He was mocked. He was kind of like COVID. He was barred from hospitals and stuff. His employers were like, "You're a great surgeon. Just don't talk about that crazy thing." He came to the US, I think, during the Civil War, and they were mocking him. Like everyone knows you're supposed to put mud in a wound, right? And before he died, I think he was, I don't know what award he got, but it was recognized. The award
Yeah.
was the entire global. Now you say it, and you're like, yeah, clean the surgical tools. It's like, yeah, duh. It's
Yeah.
That's the only example I can think of a dude who was right. Most things in life, from astronomers burned at the stake to even it was I think last weekend it was the 62nd anniversary, and it's proof in point. I can't even remember his name, but the man who saved the world, the man on the Soviet Union sub who refused to fire the nuclear torpedo during the Cuban Missile Crisis because they had thought war had broken out because they had not heard anything, and it turns out there was something wrong with the communication. I believe, he and everyone on that submarine were black sheep, blacklisted, persona non grata. You're a failure in the Soviet Union. And I think the main dude like died alone in his apartment with dementia. Unfortunately, it seems that the greatest acts one can do, root yourself in God, root yourself in what you know is right, and to stand up to it. It's almost a certainty that it will be posthumous. And which I suppose you could look at in a different way and say it really tests your character. How much do you believe in this? And if you truly
Right.
believe it, it's the right thing to do. And not something silly like I truly believe blue is the best color. I mean, if you truly believe in something and you think that the inverse of it is going to harm people in a weird way, I think the posthumous recognition is an honor in itself. That it is so immense that they were either so far ahead that they couldn't be recognized for a century later, or he was so right that people's egos got involved and they didn't want to say he was right until he's dead. In a weird way, I think that's an honor in itself to only be posthumously recognized.
Well, I like the way they're doing it now, near real time. These kids are actually haven't been out long enough to not be able to come back. I mean, Anthrax veterans, it's been 28 plus years,
Sure.
right? So it's not realistic to bring them back in at this point, but it is absolutely realistic, achievable, and reasonable to just upgrade their paperwork. So on this concept of history, I mean, there is an aversion to history, unfortunately, and as a result, we don't learn our lessons. Many current government and military officials, they kind of just want to move beyond, turn the page. They want to go ahead and concentrate on current policy challenges. Well, you can't formulate good policy unless you realize how past policy has been either violated or adulterated. One example is the idea that we had a national biodefense strategy when the pandemic happened. President Trump was the first president to put forth a national biodefense strategy. It wasn't implemented. It wasn't implemented because they try to frame the pandemic origins as other than a lab leak. So the national biodefense strategy essentially required
To be an
it to be
external threat. Yeah.
some kind of
And
bio
a
incident,
nation
right?
state threat. Yeah.
But they tried to say that it was natural, and we all know that that's false at this point. That was the false narrative, but it stopped the national biodefense strategy from being implemented. It stopped all the stakeholders from being at the table. It turned it into a siloed, a stovepiped type process out of the White House, and they bungled it big time with their mandates. And from a history perspective, sometimes they do get it right. Historically, well after the fact. Presidents Clinton, Bush, they went back and they tried to do reconciliation for radiation testing veterans, for Agent Orange veterans. So there are examples where even with these medical malfeasance situations that they've gone back and they've tried to fix it, but unfortunately they're waiting 3, 4, 5 decades later. That can't happen. We have veterans that are injured due to these shots. We have veterans that have been harmed from a adverse personnel action standpoint. We need to correct it. If we're going to regain the trust of the American people, of our potential future citizen soldiers, we need to correct this stuff real time so that when people enter the military, they can trust their chain of command and their senior leadership.
Yeah. I just finished a book yesterday, uh, called The Devil Reached Towards the Sky. It's a new book about all things Manhattan Project. And it makes me, and one of the guys I've had on the show, I think it's probably one of the, and it's really only cool to me because it's like it's not like a popular guest, but it was a gentleman I had on who believes in his late 80s or early 90s, and he was I forget the name of the ship, I think Curtis, USS Curtis. He was on the ship at the Castle Bravo test in 1954, and what was 15 megatons. They thought it was going to be five. He was there, and he's recollected over the decades how many of his friends died from radiation, and he was lucky the wind blew in the right direction and his ship wasn't hit, but he knows, and he still tears up about it. And this was in 1954, and it's yeah, I mean, you wait decades either intentionally to not pay him out, to hush hush it, cover it up. I mean, I know when it went off and it caused the crazy radiation spread all around the oceans, all the ocean currents. And I think one reporter asked Eisenhower if he wanted to speak on that, and he said, no, I'd rather not. And then that was the end of it. And it's like, okay, well, that's easy, and okay, but a lot of people died from that, and then you can go even darker, and a lot of it's postulated that it wasn't an accident that these Marines were in the air, in the path of the airstream. That was intentional because we saw with Hiroshima just how much radiation damaging it, and we went, hey, well, here's this new thing. It's 1,000 times stronger. Let's see what this puppy does. And it's evil, man. It's evil, and I think there's a moral obligation to stand up to it, and it doesn't make it easy. I mean, you've had backlash. Major Tom Haviland, I've had him on here. His career was ruined. Um, but yeah, I think it's back to the posthumous thing. You got to really dig your heels in and go, is this meaningful? Is this what I'm here for? Is this what God's directing me to do? Is this, or if you don't believe in God, is this what my heart is directing me to do? I think it. I think if you truly know in your heart of hearts that if you don't do something, people are going to suffer, I think you need to anchor yourself and act. And it's easy for me to say. I'm 35. I don't have a military career, but I think that's what you need to do. And it's important to talk
Agreed.
about this stuff. And as you're doing it, it's very important to keep it refreshed in the minds of people because it can happen again.
That's why we're talking 2.5 years later, giving
Correct.
you the update. We have to study history. We got to make sure it doesn't repeat. We got to do the after action reports. We got to tabulate the lessons learned so we don't make these same gargantuan mistakes over and over again.
Is that your book behind you?
It is, yes. So that book was published last year. RFK Jr. Did one of the endorsements in it, and Dr. Peter McCullough. The foreword was done by a psychologist by the name of Philip Zimbardo, who's famous from the Stanford prison experiment. He was
Okay.
actually one of my professors at the Naval Postgraduate School, and so basically, it's kind of meaty. It's available on Amazon. Skyhorse Publishing. Grateful to Children's Health Defense for being the imprint on the book and making it happen. But my objective is exactly what we're talking about. It's the history lesson. It's let's not make these same mistakes. I only wrote it because they were making the exact same mistakes they made with the anthrax vaccine disaster. They were making those mistakes all over again with COVID.
I will put that in the description. I think you did, but if you could text me that link again, I will put it in the
I
description.
appreciate it.
I'd
I
love to.
will. I got to run and catch a flight, Tommy. I
Yeah, I
sure
was about. Well,
appreciate.
I was about to cut you off. I was about to
All
boot you. So
right.
yeah, we're good. It's great minds. So we'll wrap this up. But man, not only do I appreciate your time, but I appreciate what you've done and what you're continuing to do. And that is a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they won't sit under. Not calling you an old man, but you get the
Getting
idea.
there.
All right, brother. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for your
Tommy.
time, man. God bless what you do. Send me the link to that book. I will send you the link to
Welcome.
this episode. Look forward to the next one.
Take care, sir.